Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. And it doesn't matter what one of the 25 time zones you're in, I just hope that you're incredibly well and in the peak of good health, and make sure that you're keeping very warm because it's getting very cold out there, so make sure you get that lovely hot chocolate and cuddle up and keep cosy. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Tom and I'm from Washington State, and my Bigfoot encounter happened when I was about 28 years old in about 1997. I grew up in a delightful neighbourhood where the properties were situated quite close together on reasonable-sized front and back yards that were flanked on the right-hand side of the valley by a vast area of natural woodland that was a haven for the natural indigenous wildlife. This sumptuous, dreamy woodland area was very popular for us to frequent as kids because it possessed open hiking trails for walkers and cyclists that were well maintained by the Forestry Commission. It would seem that most of the local residents enjoyed walking their dogs in this lush, pristine area of forest with its statuesque, imposing trees that towered into the blue firmament like emerald giants and were layered with luxurious carpets of velvety moss. Not to mention the forest floor, which was covered with trailing ferns and lavish, profuse ground cover. It was an idyllic place to grow up because everyone was very friendly and congenial, and as kids we would spend our time interacting with all the local kids, where we would ride our bikes down the forest trails and play hide-and-seek together. In those days our parents tended to be much more relaxed about us playing out of doors, as it was an area that appeared to have a zero crime rate, and we felt incredibly safe. There were a couple of old Victorian houses, an Edwardian home, several ranch-style houses, and some more modern-looking contemporary homes in our street, all with yards filled with colourful seasonal flowers, terraced gardens, manicured hedges, and pristine lawns of lush green resplendent turf. I grew up in a spacious ranch-style home with my mother and dad and my older brother Billy. While my mother was staying at home taking care of us, my father worked as an attorney in Seattle, which was about 45 minutes' drive from where we lived at the time. In a strange way, the story I'm going to tell you that ultimately led to my incredulous Bigfoot encounter began when a tiny seed was sown, when I was about 10 years old at the time, which unbeknown to me would ultimately turn the chords of fate like the hands of a clock until the moment was ripe for me to ultimately meet the hairy man who would leave an indelible mark on my life forever. It was on one peaceful Friday afternoon that I was riding my bike along a very peaceful, serene road where we lived, when quite suddenly my bicycle lost traction, and I went colliding into a tree and was propelled off my bike and thrust onto the grassy pavement, where I landed with an almighty thud, cushioned only by a few tufts of green grass. In that moment I became mindfully aware that I had indeed broken my leg. I remember my leg was throbbing painfully, and I noticed that it was not aligned correctly. For a moment I sat there on the grass verge, looking rather dazed and bewildered, in a stupendous silence, as I began to assimilate the shock of what had just transpired. In that second, a beautiful girl about the same age as myself, with strawberry blonde hair, porcelain skin, and blue eyes, who had been playing in the front yard at the time, came running towards me. She was wearing a long white cotton frock, and her long hair blew gently in the breeze. It would seem that she had only just moved into the Victorian house on our street, and I had never ever laid my eyes on her before. When she emerged from that house like a blue-eyed angel, I remember thinking that she was the prettiest girl that I had ever laid my eyes upon, and in that second I was smitten. "Are you all right?" she asked me earnestly. "I heard a loud crashing sound. Did you fall off your bike?" "I'm afraid so," I said. "I think I've broken my leg." "Does it hurt?" she asked, looking rather worried. "I'm afraid it does. Quite a bit, actually," I said. The girl bent over to examine my leg. I think you're right. Your leg is very definitely broken. Don't move. I'm going to get help right now. I'm Emma, by the way. I've only just moved into the Victorian house over there, she said, pointing to the pale blue home. It's number 85. What number house is yours? 75, I said. As she scurried away, I remember thinking, wow, 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 she's so bewitchingly beautiful. Before long, the girl's mother came bustling out of the house, and she bore an uncanny resemblance to her daughter, with the same flawless porcelain skin, sparkling blue eyes, and ravishingly beautiful long strawberry blonde hair. "Are you all right?" she asked me, with a note of deep concern in her voice. "Emma told me that you've broken your leg. What rotten bad luck. Listen, I've called 911 and the emergency services, and they're on their way," she assured me. "But Emma's gone to call your mother for you." Before long, I was transported to hospital with my mother by my side, who was holding my hand with a desperately concerned look on her face. "Mum, I'll be fine," I assured her. "Please stop worrying. I've only broken a leg. I wasn't run over by a bus." "Even so, darling," protested my mother, "I wish to goodness sake you would be a little bit more careful on that bike of yours. You do tend to be rather rambunctious and reckless on it, if you don't mind me saying. You're getting yourself into all kinds of scrapes and troubles at the moment." In a twinkling of an eye, I had left the hospital, where I was fitted with a rather impressive-looking white cast that I hobbled around on for a few weeks while my leg healed. I did get a visit from Emma and her mother once, when they spontaneously turned up my house out of the blue to ask how the patient was doing. They brought me a big balloon that said, "Get well soon," and a magnificent box of the most delicious chocolates. I remember they were wrote on my cast, and Emma wrote, "Get better soon, and don't fall off any more bikes again, because I may not be there to rescue you next time." And then she put, "Love, Emma." I treasured her message more than anybody else's. After my bicycle accident, I sadly never saw much of Emma again, because she never seemed to interact or play with the local kids in the area. I found out that she had a very strict disciplinarian father who did not let her out of his sight for a moment, and I sensed that the rumours that circulated about her must indeed be true. I remember thinking, what a bummer. I longed to get to know the mysterious, beautiful strawberry blonde girl at number 85 Forest Road a whole lot better. I did see her a couple of times in passing me on the street when I was riding my bicycle. She was in her family's BMW, and she would wave at me from the car and smile at me through the window. I remember thinking, that's the girl I want to marry one day when I'm all grown up. When I was about 15 years old, we left our family home in Forest Road and moved into a neighbourhood 15 minutes away from Seattle, as it was much more convenient for my father from a work point of view or perspective. We moved into a really vibrant up-and-coming area, bustling with restaurants, coffee shops, pretty little local shops, a bakery, a butcher and a delicatessens, literally only a heartbeat away from where we lived. For a teenage boy, it was an exciting, thrilling and energising place to live, and I enjoyed the benefits of living in this bustling, thriving community with all kinds of indoor and outdoor pursuits. Fast forward to about August of 1997, and by this time I was 28 years old and had been through a series of tumultuous relationships with several young women over the years that had never worked out, because I always seemed to date women who were so intense and exceedingly possessive, which began to be a rather big issue for me. At this stage of my life, I was living in my own apartment, and I was working as a policeman in the local area, and I was really enjoying my job in the local community, and had met so many interesting congenial people, as well as your usual vagrants, drug addicts and drunks, which was a commonplace problem among the police officers on duty, having to deal with, including, of course, domestic disputes, local brawls, and other emergency scenarios, which I'm sure you can imagine. I received a call one night at about 11 o'clock that was an intruder trying to break in. "Not to worry, ma'am," I said politely. "You go back into your house and I'll check the premises for you to see if anybody's out here." "Could you check the tall evergreen conifers in the backyard, officer?" said the young woman. "The perpetrator could be hiding out there. It's densely thicketed, I'm afraid. I'm not sure whether someone is trying to scare me, as some kind of a sick practical joke, or if in fact there is a man trying to break in because he knows I'm all on my own and sees me as a sitting duck. I'll check everything, I assured her. I began to walk around the house with my flashlight, examining the whole area, and recently there had been a great deal of rain in Washington, and so I was pretty certain that I might find some evidence or footprints, and I was not wrong. I observed some muddy footprints trailing around Emma's home, especially outside her kitchen wall. These footprints were easily 16 inches long, and they just seemed way too big for a natural man. I mean, they were colossal in size. If that wasn't odd enough, the individual loitering around the Victorian house had been patrolling the place in his bare feet, without wearing any shoes, which was weirder still. It was decidedly odd, but it was clear to me that someone had indeed been snooping around the property. But who or what, I could not imagine. The only thing that could have feet this large was a bear, but that idea was preposterous as the footprints were distinctly humanoid, with very clear toe imprints, and so it was utterly peculiar, and I was flummoxed by what I was observing. As I got to the front door, it was flung open by the young woman who said to me, "Officer, did you find anything? I'm so terribly concerned." "I'm afraid I did, ma'am," I told her. "There were some very large footprints outside the front of your home, especially behind your kitchen wall, and also a few smudge marks on the wall outside your kitchen, as well as on the windows, which does indeed suggest that someone has been loitering around in the living areas of your home. The good news is I actually believe the perpetrator has finally left the premises, because there is no sign of anyone around on your property right now." "Officer, I don't feel safe," she told me, looking anxious. "What if he comes back?" she asked awkwardly. "Don't worry," I reassured her. "I'll keep patrolling the area as I'm on duty tonight, and I'll be keeping my eyes fixed on your home, and I'll make absolutely certain that you're fine." "Thank you, officer. I'm so grateful," she said. The lady looked at me and suddenly said, "Have I met you before?" she asked. "You look strangely familiar to me, but I can't quite place you. Have we met somewhere before?" I grinned. "I remember you," I told her. "Very well, actually." "Do you remember helping a little boy who'd fallen off his bike over there?" I said, pointing to the grassy verge on the opposite side of the road. "No," she gasped, covering her mouth with astonishment. "You're not him." "It's true," I said. "It's me." "You've got to come in now," she said. "You're Tom, is that right? I do remember you very well. You were always getting yourself into scrapes and all kinds of trouble. I remember writing on your leg cast," she said, giggling. "Nothing's changed much," I said. "You're Emma, right? You remember?" "How could I forget?" I chuckled. "Not every boy gets rescued by a beautiful strawberry blonde girl with sparkling blue eyes when they break a leg." Before long I was chatting away with Emma in her kitchen as she scurried around heating up milk and making us big mugs of hot chocolate, which she sprinkled with marshmallows and topped with delicious whipped cream. "If you're going to have hot chocolate," she giggled, "it's got to be decadent, chocolatey and very naughty with tons and tons of calories." I remember that our conversation just flowed seamlessly as we chatted away like old friends. I'd never felt this comfortable talking to a woman before, but with Emma the conversation was easy and uninhibited. I was to learn that Emma had not played with the local kids as a girl, because her father was a very authoritarian, draconian kind of man, who insisted that she studied and refused to let her play outdoors, so it appeared that the rumours about her were indeed true. "You know, he was a headmaster of a local school," she told me. "He ran our household in the same uncompromising, pertinacious way he took charge of that school. I do not know why my mother put up with my dad. He was awfully difficult, you know. He was very old school, stringent and pretty bull-headed, if the truth be told. He was a lot older than my mother. I think there was a 25-year-old age difference between them both, which I think proved challenging for my mother later on." "Wow, that is a big age gap," I reflected. "Is he still around, your dad, I mean?" "No, he died about 5 years ago," said Emma, taking a sip of her chocolate. "Now this is what I call a good hot chocolate," she said. "Oh, I did love my dad, you know, but when he died I felt almost as if I'd been set free. Does that sound really terrible?" Of course you did, I said. You were no longer being ruled by a rod of iron, and you felt like a caged bird that could finally fly again. I can't blame you for that. Does that sound terrible, she said, to be talking like that about my late dad? Of course not, I said. What about your mother? Where is she now? Oh, she's gallivanting around on a cruise liner with her tall, dark, sultry, handsome lover, who's 15 years her junior. So she likes her men older or a whole lot younger, I teased, but never men who are the right age for her. You would be right about that, laughed Emma. Suddenly she coughed and sniffed. Oh, sorry about that, she said. You must excuse me if I'm sniffing, she exclaimed. I've recently been getting lots of stuffy, congested headaches and flu-like symptoms. I've also had the occasional dizzy spell and 1 or 2 fainting attacks. I even had moments that I couldn't remember things. Would you believe it, I actually put the dirty laundry into the freezer rather than the washing machine. You know, I really thought I had some serious lifelong impediment, like a degenerating disease of some sort, but I was informed by the doctor that I was absolutely fine. As ironic as it sounds, I felt a little phony at the doctor's because at my appointment my symptoms just vanished. Well, that's typical, I said. He said I obviously had a seasonal cold, but I don't seem to be getting any better, despite all the medications he's given me. If anything, all that paracetamol is making my condition a lot worse. Maybe you need to see another doctor, I suggested. I always believe it doesn't hurt to get a second opinion. After our conversation, I assured Emma I would patrol the place every hour, but if she wanted me to stay over at her premises to watch over the place, I would happily sleep on the sofa. I can do better than that, she said. I can put you up in the spare room upstairs if you like, and I'd love you to stay if you didn't mind. You see, if the intruder sees there's a man around the place, then hopefully he'll be scared away. Maybe I'm being harassed because I'm all on my own and I'm an easy target while my mother's away. And so it was that on this very evening I brought my overnight suitcase with me and moved into the spare room of Emma's Victorian home. I was feeling very animated and excited because not only was Emma so beautiful, but she was such an incredible person, and I could feel that I was falling for her in a big way, and there was a very evident chemistry between us, or a spark if you like. I was pleased to have an excuse to be staying at her home, which was the perfect opportunity to get more acquainted with this mysterious, remarkable woman. I noticed at the moment that I moved into Emma's home that I felt that the air in her house seemed stuffy and oppressive, and I began to acquire the same flu-like symptoms that Emma had. I was surprised at my appalling immune response, because I was never one before to succumb to the cold. Before long, we were both convinced that I had caught her flu. I felt so unwell that I actually called off sick at the station. We spent the time together watching television, ordering takeouts, eating popcorn and drinking hot chocolate and making all kinds of flu remedies together for ourselves, but nothing seemed to work for us. It's a nasty flu, said Emma, because it just won't go away, and I can only apologise for passing it on to you. That evening, as Emma and I were watching television and I was falling asleep on the couch, I was awoken to Emma shaking me violently. Her eyes were as wide as saucers, and her skin had grown a deathly pale colour. "He's back," she said. "The intruder's back. Can you hear all the banging around the house? It's so scary." I was feeling very sluggish, tired and very woozy, and I almost stumbled as I made it out of the front door, due to being disorientated and dizzy. What the heck was wrong with me, I wondered, as I seemed incapable of focusing. Once I was breathing the fresh air, I seemed to revive and feel a whole lot better, and even sturdier on my feet. After gathering my bearings, I observed a dark, shadowy silhouette, standing only yards away from where I was, and at first I thought it was a bear. What the heck, I thought. Was I hallucinating or something? I immediately shone my flashlight on the creature, and I nearly dropped it in shock. Now I knew I had to be hallucinating. Maybe it was a side effect of the flu medication, I thought, because this thing I was looking at could not possibly be real. There was no way. I shone my torch back on the critter and stared at it in a stupefied silence. To my amazement, the creature didn't run away at all, but seemed to stare at me for a moment, and I got the very real sense he was trying to communicate to me. He kept pointing to the house with his overlong arm and then touching his flat pug-like nose. Again and again he kept doing this. I had never observed a critter like this before, nor had I heard any documented accounts of such a creature existing here in North America, so what it was, I couldn't imagine. The critter was humanoid in shape, much like a man but built like a giant, and the torso area of his body bore an uncanny resemblance to the great ape. It was taut with sinewy muscle definition and overlong arms, powerful lean strong legs, and a narrow waist. The creature possessed a large bullet-shaped head that seamlessly blended into the massive shoulders, and when I say massive, they were gargantuan, with no real evidence of a neck to speak of. The whole body was covered with long median-length brown hair, similar in colour to a black bear, but the hair was more like the length of a long-haired German shepherd dog. I'm quite certain the critter was at least 8 foot tall, possibly more, about 750 pounds, and about 3 foot wide. The critter's face was rather human-like in appearance, with a prominent, very distinctive brow ridge that was deeply furrowed, with lots and lots of wrinkles. The skin looked leathery, and it also looked rather weathered. The eyes were deep-set and dark, with some red eye-shine, and the mouth was somewhat rather narrow. I stared at the critter in a stupefied awe. I was too astonished to be afraid of it, because my fears were suppressed and temporarily bypassed by my complete incredulity of what I was actually seeing, for indeed the creature was without doubt one of the most powerful, lofty, majestic, magnificent and intelligent creatures that I have ever encountered. I could tell that the critter meant me absolutely no harm, as his demeanour was very kindly and very gentle towards me, without the remotest hint of aggression. I can assure you that if the creature had been hostile towards me, I would have been petrified out of my skin. Of that I am in no doubt, because even to look at, he seemed incredibly intimidating and very scary. What was the creature trying to tell me, I wondered? He kept pointing over and over again to the kitchen area of the house, tapping at the Pacific area of the wall and touching his nose. He even went up to the wall and put his nose directly on the spot. He repeated the same strange mannerisms a few times. It was all very mystifying, and then I watched in amazement as the creature glided away, moving its overlong arms backwards and forwards, as if it was marching with 5-foot strides, and his movements were so fluid, flawless and graceful, and I remember thinking, wow, what an incredible, majestic creature that is. "Did you see anything?" asked Emma, as I returned into the house. "No, nothing," I said, "nothing at all," as the last thing I wanted to tell her was about the strange critter that I'd encountered, and scare her half to death in the process. As I entered the house, I suddenly sensed that the house felt very stuffy and muggy, and then it suddenly hit me like a bolt of electricity or a beacon of light lighting up a lighthouse at sea for the lost sailors on their fishing boats to guide them back to safety. "Do you have a gas boiler?" I asked Emma. "Of course," she said, "over there in the kitchen." To my horror, in exactly the same location that the creature had been tapping with his giant-sized hand and touching with his nose, was a gas boiler, and it appeared to have a yellow-brown stain around the boiler, and the blue flames seemed to flicker with a very definite yellow light. That was a distinct warning bell to me. "Pack some clothes immediately," I said to Emma, as I began opening windows all over the place. "You're coming to stay at my home right now." "What are you doing?" asked Emma. "Get your things," I snapped, "and hurry, quick." To cut a long story short, I called a gas-safe service engineer to look at Emma's boiler, and as I suspected, it had been leaking a tiny bit of carbon monoxide, which the gas engineer told me could have become lethal in a couple of days as the boiler was beginning to leak very badly. I realised we were incredibly lucky to be alive, and I believe that the hairy critter had sensed the problem, either physically, telepathically or vibrationally, with extrasensory ability, and was trying to get us to address it, which was why it kept tapping on Emma's windows. If it was not for the creature, I'm pretty certain we would definitely be dead. As you can imagine, like all love stories, mine definitely ends very happily. But I'm not a man who sits on his laurels, because 6 months after I met Emma, I proposed to her. I could have done it on the first night, but I knew it was better to wait. So I proposed to her at a beautiful location in Washington, overlooking the Silvery Lake. And I'm glad to say that this stunning strawberry blonde-haired woman said yes. All these years later, we are still very happily married and so much in love. And we both live in the old blue Victorian house together with our 2 teenage children. I never told Emma, nor my children, about the Bigfoot I encountered that night, and I really don't know why. For some reason it was a subject I didn't want to share, and being a police officer I was less likely to talk about such strange anomalies to other officers for fear of being typecast or being ridiculed. I also believe when you have an encounter like this, it's so deeply personal and incredibly special. It's not something that you want to tell anybody about, not even your own wife. And you can only possibly understand this conundrum if you experience an encounter with Bigfoot yourself. I thought I would share this with you, though, and your listeners in this anonymous forum, as I really think you might appreciate hearing this story. I now know that the creature I encountered was indeed a Bigfoot, and for some reason I think they seem to have some kind of extrasensory perception, or maybe they can smell things we cannot detect. I think some of these creatures seem to have a vested interest in helping humanity. I gather that the Indians believe this to be the case, and left offerings for the creatures outside the forest. More recently, my younger son did ask me if I actually believed in Bigfoot, and I told him I most certainly did. He asked me why, and I told him that we can never be sure what's out there. So there you are. That's my story. Well, I just want to thank you so very much for that incredibly romantic story. I really, really loved it, so I just want to thank you for that. And another thing I found very interesting was you were talking about the creature knowing that the house had carbon monoxide. And I find that very interesting because if you remember the tsunami that happened in Thailand and the elephants were able to detect that there was going to be the tsunami and they were terrified. They got out of the area as fast as they could, as indeed so did many animals at the time. And I wonder if carbon monoxide and stuff like that could have a vibrational quality about it that maybe animals can pick up on, because it's something we can't smell. And on the subject of carbon monoxide, as it is winter, and as there are so many people firing their ovens and so forth, do check your carbon monoxide. Make sure there's no yellow flame. Make sure there's no nasty marks outside your burner or whatever it is that you use that might have carbon monoxide potential. And also get a carbon monoxide detector, because that could very easily save your life. Until next time, goodbye and good night.